You lost, sweetheart. The admin office is that way. The words sliced through the dry Arizona air like a blade. Captain Riley Monroe stood still, her boots sinking slightly into the baking tarmac outside Fort Huachuca's training yard. The three male trainees who surrounded her wore the same expression, smirks dripping with easy arrogance, the kind that only grows where ignorance lives unchallenged. To them, she was just another woman in uniform. 5'6", quiet, composed. They saw the freckles on her sunburned skin before they saw the calm in her eyes. What they couldn't see, what they'd never imagine, was the dim compound outside Kandahar where she dropped 4 armed fighters in 12 seconds flat, while a SEAL team watched in stunned silence. They didn't see the missions where she bled, fought, and won. They didn't hear the name the operators gave her, Specter, whispered with respect, not novelty. Riley didn't correct them. She never did. Arrogance was a noise she had learned to outlast. In 6 hours, those same men would choke on their laughter during the base's combat readiness assessment, the kind of humiliation earned the hard way. For now, the desert shimmered, heat waves twisting the horizon into something unreal. The yard buzzed with movement, cadets jogging, instructors shouting, the clatter of rifles being checked and rechecked. Dust clung to everything, turning the air itself into a fine, gritty haze. Riley adjusted her OCP sleeves, the fabric stiff from sweat and sun. No visible ribbons, no name tags to brag with, just the field uniform of someone who didn't need decoration to be taken seriously. That too was intentional. Most people saw what they wanted. Maybe a logistics officer or a transport driver. Never the embedded operator who had run door-to-door missions with Navy SEALs under live fire. Never the cultural support specialist who spent nights in Hellman's blacked-out compounds, listening for footsteps that meant death. She had worn the title guest instructor for the week, a vague introduction meant to satisfy paperwork. The students didn't know her record. The staff barely glanced at her resume, and honestly, she preferred it that way. Respect wasn't something she asked for anymore. It was something she earned repeatedly through blood, exhaustion, and the silence that follows disbelief. It was a kind of peace she had carved out for herself, one that existed just beyond the noise of men who thought she didn't belong. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to Courage and Honor, Veterans TV, so you never miss these fascinating tales of valor and quiet strength. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. Riley took a slow breath. The Arizona sun burned against her faceplate, and for a fleeting second, the scent of gunpowder and diesel filled her memory. Kandahar again, the echo of controlled breathing, the weight of her M4 steady in her hands. She blinked it away. The war was over, at least on paper. But some battles, the ones fought in whispers and glances and assumptions, never really ended. Riley Monroe hadn't planned to become a symbol. She had grown up on the northern edge of Wyoming, in a town where winter came early and stayed long enough to test your will. Her father, a former Marine sniper instructor, taught her that precision was an act of discipline, not ego. Her mother, a survivalist at heart, taught her that luck was what people invented when they hadn't trained hard enough. At 10, Riley could strip and reassemble a rifle faster than most grown men. By 14, she was running night drills in the backyard, timing her shots by the sound of wind through pine trees. There were no promises in her family, just preparation. Her parents didn't say you can be anything. They said be twice as good as everyone else and let the work speak. And it did. By 19, Riley had enlisted. Her test scores drew the attention of the Army's Cultural Support Team Initiative, a program that trained female soldiers to deploy with special operations units. On paper, it was a liaison role. In practice, it was something far tougher. The training was brutal. Selection meant running the same gauntlet as male candidates. Close quarters battle, advanced marksmanship, field medicine, and small unit tactics. She failed twice. The third time, she came back harder, faster, sharper, and finished in the top 15%. Her first deployment was to Helmand Province. The platoon she joined, SEALs hardened by too many tours, weren't thrilled to have a woman in the stack. A liability, one of them muttered. But Riley didn't argue. She showed up, she performed, and she never asked for acknowledgement. She breached doors under fire, cleared rooms shoulder to shoulder with the same men who doubted her, and patched their wounds when things went sideways. Respect didn't come quickly, but when it came, it was absolute. After a night ambush in Sangin, when she neutralized 4 insurgents before the SEAL element could regroup, the team's chief gave her a new call sign, Specter. The name stuck. From that day forward, no one questioned her place. Years later, standing in the sterile sun of Fort Huachuca, Riley could still feel that name echo in the back of her skull. But here it meant nothing. To the students, she was just a guest, one more instructor cycling through the base's leadership course. The quiet one, the one who didn't talk much during briefings. That morning, during a range observation, a trainee named Specialist Grant swaggered up to her, eyes hidden behind reflective lenses. He asked if she needed directions to the admin building. His tone carried the same dismissive humor that always followed her in new commands. His buddies laughed. Riley didn't respond. By afternoon, during the tactical briefing, the lead instructor introduced her simply, Captain Monroe, guest advisor with combat experience. Grant leaned back, smirked, and whispered to his friend, combat experience probably means paperwork and PowerPoint. The Rao chuckled. The instructor said nothing. Riley's jaw tightened, but her expression didn't change. She had fought wars that didn't need witnesses. This wasn't new, it was just louder. What none of them knew was that she'd spent nights in Afghan villages so quiet you could hear your heartbeat through your Kevlar. That she had run hostage recovery missions where hesitation meant death. Now she was back home, and somehow this doubt, hurt worse than enemy fire. Not because it threatened her, but because it reminded her how fragile respect still was. When Captain Hendricks, the officer in charge, outlined the upcoming combat readiness assessment, Riley noticed a flaw in the approach vector. She raised her hand and pointed it out. A weakness that would expose the assault team to fire from an elevated flank. Her tone was calm, precise, respectful. But before she could finish, Grant interrupted. "Ma'am," he said, "real combat doesn't work like Call of Duty. Maybe let people with actual gunfighting experience handle this one." The room laughed again. Hendricks didn't correct him. He just moved on, flipping his clipboard to the next page. Riley sat back, her pulse steady but her eyes burning. She had seen this play before, and as the laughter faded, she realized something chillingly familiar. This wasn't prejudice born of malice. It was the casual disbelief of people who had never seen what she'd seen. That was always the harder battle to win. That night, the barracks were silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan and the faint rattle of desert wind sneaking through the window screen. Riley sat on the edge of her bunk, staring at the floor, her elbows resting on her knees. The day's heat lingered in the air, thick and heavy. She'd endured worse, much worse, but somehow, the quiet sting of dismissal cut deeper than any wound she'd carried overseas. She thought about the briefing room, the laughter, the way Hendricks had just looked past her. She thought about Helmand, the one place where nobody had cared about gender, only competence. The memory came uninvited. The compound's walls had been mud-thick and painted with the grime of a dozen firefights. Her team had been pulling back after an extraction when 4 armed fighters emerged from a side alley. The night split open with gunfire. Riley was rear security, alone, exposed. She dropped the first 2 before they'd cleared the doorway. The third tried to flank. She pivoted, firing as she moved. The last one ran. 12 seconds later, 4 bodies lay still, and the SEAL element was already regrouping. When the dust settled, the platoon chief had looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. No jokes, no questions. Just a silent nod that said everything words couldn't. "You belong here." Riley blinked back to the present. The ceiling fan kept turning, slicing through the darkness like a metronome for her thoughts. She wasn't angry. Not really. Anger burned out too fast. This was something quieter, heavier. An exhaustion born from constantly having to prove what she already knew. She pulled her boots off and rubbed the scar that ran along her ankle, shrapnel from an IED in Marya. The medic said she was lucky to keep her foot. Riley didn't believe in luck. She believed in muscle memory, in discipline, in refusing to freeze when the world went sideways. When the morning came, she'd do what she always did, show up, keep her mouth shut, and let her actions speak. Dawn hit Fort Huachuca like a hammer. The sky turned molten gold over the mountains, and the training yard came alive with the sound of rifles and shouted orders. Today was the combat readiness assessment. 60 students divided into teams of 6. each tasked with infiltrating a simulated enemy compound, rescuing a mock hostage, and exfiltrating under simulated fire. Riley was assigned as an observer. Hendricks had made that clear. "Just watch, take notes, and give feedback." She nodded. No argument. The first 3 teams went through the course. Every one of them made the same mistake, approaching from the vector she'd warned about. Each team got shredded by simulated fire from the elevated position. Their timing was off, their spacing sloppy, their communication weak. By the 3rd iteration, even the range officers looked frustrated. When Specialist Grant's team stepped up, the air buzzed with confidence and testosterone. He took the lead, barking orders, charging forward without checking angles. Within seconds, half his team was down. Simulated casualties hit 50% before they even breached. Grant cursed, blamed his squad, and stormed off the range. Captain Hendricks called a halt. He gathered the group under the shade canopy, sweat dripping down every face. "Anyone want to explain what went wrong?" he asked. No one spoke. The silence stretched. Then one of the range officers, the same one who had been watching Riley quietly all morning, spoke up. "Sir, maybe we should have someone demonstrate the right way." Hendricks scanned the crowd. His gaze stopped on Riley. "Captain Monroe," he said, his voice neutral. "You think you can do better?" The question hung there like a dare. Riley met his eyes. "Yes, sir," she said softly, and in that moment, every whisper, every laugh, every ounce of doubt condensed into something razor-sharp and cold inside her chest. It was time to remind them what an operator looked like. 10 minutes later, the range went quiet. The Arizona wind swept fine dust across the shoot house, soft as smoke. The safety officers ran through final checks, and the range OIC gave a curt nod from the tower. Captain Riley Monroe stood at the start point, helmet strapped, face shield down, M4 loaded with simunition rounds. Alone. No team. No backup, just her against the course. The radio crackled. "Shooter ready." Riley nodded once. "Execute." She moved. Her boots hit the gravel in a rhythm she hadn't forgotten. The same deliberate cadence from Helmand, the same pace that had saved lives. She didn't sprint. She flowed, her breathing steady, eyes scanning every angle. She veered off the main route immediately, cutting low across the flanking terrain she had mapped in her head during the briefing. The simulated gunfire from the elevated position opened up where the other teams had charged blindly. But she wasn't there. She came up under the ridge, leveled her weapon, and fired 2 rounds, then 2 more. Controlled pairs. Clean, efficient. Targets dropped in rapid sequence. She pivoted, sliding behind a low barrier, reloading by feel. Her movements were surgical. No wasted motion, no panic. The range officers leaned forward, murmuring into headsets. 8 seconds, and the high threat position was neutralized. Then she was on the move again, crossing the open ground at a crouch. The compound loomed ahead, its plywood walls covered in dust and the faint scorch marks of past drills. Every other team had gone through the front door. Riley didn't. She approached from the blind side, checking corners, then vaulted through a low window with the kind of precision that comes from 1,000 repetitions. Inside, the echo of her breathing mixed with the faint mechanical hum of the target system. The first target popped from behind a barricade. She shot once center mass. Another appeared, 2 rounds. Third one tried to flank from the hallway. She dropped, fired prone, 3 hits, 15 seconds. 3 kills. The onlookers were silent except for the clicking of timers. Riley rolled into the back room, spotted the mock hostage, a dummy slumped against the wall, and slung it over her shoulder. As she turned to move, the final target fired from outside, simulating a last-ditch ambush. Riley dropped flat, used the dummy as partial cover, and returned fire from 45 meters. 3 rounds, 3 hits. Want to cease fire, the range officer called. She froze, weapon down, chest heaving once, twice. Time. 2 minutes, 18 seconds. 0 casualties, no one spoke. The desert wind carried the sound of her footsteps as she walked off the course, weapon cleared, armor streaked with dirt. Every student stood still, helmets off, eyes wide. Specialist Grant's mouth hung open. Captain Hendricks checked the timer twice, frowning like he couldn't believe it. Riley didn't smile. She didn't need to. She just slung her weapon and walked past the group. The same calm expression on her face she'd worn since the first insult. The scoreboard said everything she didn't. Later that evening, Hendricks called her into his office. He was sitting behind his desk, the blinds drawn against the dying light. Why didn't you tell anyone? He asked quietly. About your record, about who you are. Riley stood at ease, hands behind her back. Because I shouldn't have to, sir, she said. Respect isn't earned with introductions. Hendricks nodded slowly. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said, starting tomorrow, your lead instructor for the remainder of the program. Riley hesitated. Sir, that's an order, Captain. Her lips curved into something almost like a smile. Understood. As she left, the sun bled across the horizon in streaks of crimson and gold, painting the walls in a soft glow. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Tomorrow, the same men who laughed at her would be training under her command, and by the week's end, they'd know exactly why the SEALs had called her Specter. The next morning broke clear and dry, the kind of sky that only southern Arizona could make. Hard blue, endless, brutal. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust as the students assembled on the range again. But something was different now. The laughter was gone. The jokes had dried up. Every face that turned toward Captain Riley Monroe carried a flicker of respect, or maybe something quieter. Curiosity mixed with humility. Specialist Grant was already there, helmet tucked under his arm. He didn't speak at first. When she approached, he cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said, the word careful this time, would you mind walking me through that flank again? The one you used yesterday. Riley studied him for a beat, then nodded. Grab your map. They knelt beside the sand table, the sun cutting across their faces in slanted gold. She traced the route with one gloved finger, explaining how a 30-second delay and a 5-meter angle change could have exposure time. Grant listened, really listened, scribbling notes without argument. Around them, other students gathered quietly, notebooks open. By noon, she was running them through live simulations, shouting range commands, adjusting stances, correcting timing. Her tone was firm but never cruel. Hendricks watched from the tower, arms folded, saying nothing. He didn't need to. The results spoke louder than any report. Over the next 4 days, the class transformed. The chaos she'd seen before, the sloppy movement, the unchecked bravado, shifted into precision. Teams began to move like single organisms, each step calculated. Pass rates soared from 42% to 81%. The range officers started referring to her tactics as the Monroe method. Grant caught her outside the range on the final afternoon. His uniform was streaked with sweat and dust, and for the first time all week he looked nervous. I was wrong about you, he said, voice low. About a lot of things, actually. Riley adjusted her sling and met his eyes. You weren't wrong, she said. You just didn't know better yet. He gave a small nod. Still, thank you. She didn't smile, but her tone softened. You did the work. That's what matters. When the course ended, Captain Hendricks called her in for a formal commendation. He offered to submit her performance for higher recognition, but Riley declined. I didn't come here for paperwork, she said. I came to teach. That evening, she packed her duffel in the fading orange light. Outside, the wind carried the faint metallic clink of distant rifle fire, a sound she'd never quite stopped loving. Grant and a few of the other students came by to see her off. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. The look in their eyes said everything. She drove north toward Montana with the windows down, the desert fading into shadow behind her. The mountains rose in the distance like old guardians. For the first time in weeks, she felt a quiet stillness settle in her chest. Fort Huachuca would forget her name soon enough. That was fine. She had never wanted fame, never chased validation. What she wanted, what she'd always wanted, was to prove that skill, discipline, and courage had no gender, no qualifiers. Just truth. Somewhere between the highway and the horizon, the radio caught a country station. The lyrics soft and familiar. You fight, you fall, you rise again. Riley smiled faintly and kept driving. She didn't need anyone to believe in her anymore. She just needed them to stop standing in her way.